The impossible mission, 800 words. The galaxy was in chaos. The Svarnak Empire, led by the ruthless warlord Zalthar, had swept through system after system, leaving destruction in its wake. Entire fleets had been annihilated, and hope was fading across the stars. There was only one place left where people still believed they could fight back, the Kingdom of Voria, a small but fiercely independent world known for its brave warriors. But even they, with all their strength, were no match for Zalthar's forces. In the heart of the kingdom, a princess named Lyra sat in her chamber, staring at the stars through the giant window. She was beautiful, with eyes that reflected the endless night sky, but behind her gaze was a deep sadness. Her father, King Eldric, had been trying to form alliances with other kingdoms to stand against Zalthar, but so far, nothing had worked. No one was willing to risk their armies for a small, independent world like Voria. Princess Lyra knew the truth. The galaxy was too afraid to help. The only hope left was a miracle. Or so they thought. That was when the message came. Jackson Ryder was a human, a captain in the Galactic Defense Fleet. He had a reputation as a problem solver, the kind of man who never backed down from a challenge. He had survived more battles than anyone could count and always came out victorious. But this mission was different. It was not about winning a battle or defeating an enemy, it was about saving a princess. Jackson was sitting in his command room aboard the Relentless, a massive warship, when the message arrived. A cold, electronic voice echoed in the quiet room, informing him of the princess's kidnapping by Zalthar's forces. A bounty had been placed on her head, and the message was clear: bring her back, or the kingdom would fall. This is insane, Jackson muttered under his breath as he read the details. The Svarnak Empire controls the entire system. How am I supposed to get in there and get out with the princess alive? But there was no turning back. This was his mission now, and it was not just for the galaxy, it was for his honor. He had been in countless battles, but this was different. He wasn't just going to fight, he was going to rescue someone. The stakes were higher than ever. Jackson immediately began preparations. His ship, the Relentless, was one of the most powerful in the fleet, but it wasn't invincible. He couldn't storm into the heart of the Svarnak Empire without a plan. He needed a strategy, and he needed it fast. He called upon his most trusted team members, Commander Maris, his tactical genius, Lieutenant Cade, the fleet's best marksman, and Dr. Lena, the ship's scientist, who was known for her ability to hack into enemy systems. We're going in, no questions asked, Jackson said to his crew as they gathered around the strategy table. I know it sounds crazy, but this is the only chance the princess has. We're going to need to go in under the radar, get past their defenses, and extract her without being detected. Commander Maris looked skeptical. It's impossible, Captain. The Svarnak Empire is too strong. We're talking about an entire fleet guarding that fortress. I know, Jackson replied, his eyes hardening. But we're not going to fight them head-on. We're going to use stealth. We're going to slip in, grab her, and get out before they even know we're there. It was a risky plan, but it was the only one they had. As the Relentless entered the Svarnak system, Jackson's heart raced. They were in enemy territory now, and every second counted. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. The princess was depending on him. Her kingdom was depending on him. And if he failed, everything would be lost. The ship moved silently through the vast expanse of space, weaving in and out of asteroid fields and dodging the occasional enemy patrol. The Svarnak Empire was everywhere, but they didn't know Jackson was coming. Not yet. Finally, they reached the fortress. It was a massive structure, built into the side of a planet, with walls that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. The defenses were impenetrable, and the fortress was surrounded by a fleet of warships. Jackson knew that if they were caught, they wouldn't stand a chance. But they had no choice. This was the moment of truth. We're going in, Jackson said, his voice steady. Maris, prepare the boarding team. Cade, you're on the sniper rifle. Dr. Lena, get ready to hack the fortress's security systems. We're going to get her out. The team moved quickly, each of them understanding the gravity of what they were about to do. They had no backup, no reinforcements. It was just them against an entire empire. Jackson led the way, his heart pounding in his chest. He had faced danger before, but this was different. This wasn't about fighting. This was about rescuing someone who needed him. Someone who depended on him. As they entered the fortress, everything fell silent. The air was thick with tension. They moved through the corridors, avoiding guards and security cameras, until they finally reached the princess's cell. But just as they were about to break down the door, a voice echoed through the halls. "You're too late, human," a cold, menacing voice said. "You will never leave this place alive." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He didn't know how, but he was going to save the princess. No matter the cost. The door exploded open, and there she was. Princess Lyra, standing tall despite her captivity, her eyes full of fire and defiance. Jackson stepped forward, locking eyes with her. "We're getting out of here," he said, his voice calm and confident. "And I'm not leaving without you." The king's demand, 800 words. The escape was just the beginning, but the true test of their survival was about to begin. As Jackson and Princess Lyra raced through the dark, twisting corridors of the Svarnak fortress, they were no longer just evading enemies, they were racing against time. Every second brought them closer to a fleet of Svarnak warships, and every step increased the danger. But for now, Jackson's focus was on one thing, getting the princess to safety. They reached the hangar bay where the Relentless was docked, but as they were about to board, the sound of heavy boots echoing down the hallway made Jackson's blood run cold. They weren't alone anymore. "Move," he shouted, pushing the princess ahead of him, his hand gripping the pulse rifle tightly. He'd fought countless battles, but this felt different. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for someone he had just met, a princess who was now an unwilling ally in a war far bigger than either of them had imagined. The moment they stepped onto the ship, the heavy door sealed behind them. Jackson quickly activated the ship's engines. "We're going to need every ounce of speed we've got," he muttered as the ship's engines hummed to life. As the Relentless began its ascent, leaving the Svarnak fortress far behind, Jackson allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The princess was safe for now. But he knew the road ahead would be far more treacherous. "We did it," Lyra whispered, her voice a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. "We're out." Jackson turned to face her, his expression grim. "We're not safe yet. The Svarnak Empire won't let you go this easily." Her eyes hardened, a fierce resolve replacing the uncertainty that had clouded her face moments before. "I've lived my entire life surrounded by the Svarnak's influence. But I will not live in fear any longer. I will not be a pawn in their game." Jackson nodded. For the first time, he saw the true strength in the princess. She wasn't just a helpless royal, she was a fighter. But what the princess didn't know yet was that her fight had only just begun. The journey to Voria, the princess's home planet, was long and dangerous. The galaxy was vast, and the Relentless was a small ship, easy to track. Jackson knew the Svarnak Empire wouldn't let go of the princess so easily. There would be more ships, more dangers, and perhaps even a betrayal lurking in the shadows. Days passed as they sailed through uncharted space, avoiding the Svarnak patrols as best they could. But the deeper they went, the more the weight of the situation became clear. Lyra wasn't just a princess, she was a symbol of hope for a galaxy on the brink of collapse. Her capture had sent shockwaves across the stars. The Svarnak Empire's brutality was known far and wide, but Lyra's disappearance had ignited something in the hearts of many. It wasn't just about her now, it was about the survival of an entire world, maybe even the galaxy. One evening, as the two of them stood on the bridge of the Relentless, staring at the stars, Lyra spoke up. "Jackson, why are you doing this? Why risk your life for someone you barely know?" Jackson turned to face her, his eyes betraying a deep pain. Because I've seen what the Sparnak Empire can do to people. I've seen the fear in their eyes. And I'm not about to let that happen to you, or anyone else, for that matter. Lyra looked at him for a long time, as if seeing him for the first time. And what do you want in return? She asked, her voice quieter this time. Jackson thought for a moment. Nothing. I'm not doing this for fame or fortune. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. And because you deserve to be free. A silence fell between them, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was understanding. Lyra's eyes softened. For the first time, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She didn't feel like the powerless daughter of a king. She felt free. But as the days passed, the weight of their mission grew heavier. The closer they got to Voria, the more Jackson began to realize something that had been haunting him since he first laid eyes on the princess. It wasn't just about the princess's freedom anymore. It was about the kingdom, the future of Voria, and everything it stood for. The people of Voria were depending on them, not just for rescue, but for something bigger. The kingdom was on the brink of war. The Sparnak Empire's reach was too strong, and if they didn't act soon, there would be no Voria left to protect. Jackson had saved the princess, but now there was a new challenge. How could he protect an entire planet when they were surrounded by enemies on all sides? How could they stand against the might of the Sparnak Empire when they were so outnumbered? Lyra seemed to sense the shift in the air. She stood beside Jackson as they looked out into the dark abyss of space, the quiet hum of the relentless filling the silence. Jackson, she said softly, her voice steady and strong, I don't want to be forced into a marriage, not with anyone, especially not for a political alliance. Jackson glanced at her, confusion clouding his features. What do you mean? Her gaze was unwavering. I know my father will demand we unite, he'll demand that I marry you. But I don't want that. I don't want to be treated like a prize to be claimed. I want to make my own choices, my own future. Jackson's heart sank as he realized the true weight of their journey. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the right to choose their own destinies. The ties that bind, 800 words. The Relentless coasted silently through space as Jackson and Princess Lyra grew closer to Voria. The journey, though long, allowed them both time to reflect. What had begun as a mission of necessity was now more than either of them had bargained for. Their bond, forged in the fires of battle, was growing stronger, but so were the shadows that loomed over them. Jackson stood at the bridge of the ship, gazing out at the distant stars. The weight of the mission was starting to press down on him. They weren't just escaping an enemy, they were entering a storm far bigger than either of them could have imagined. The princess was more than just a symbol of hope. She was the key to a new future for Voria. But there was a danger in that, a danger that could destroy everything. As the ship drifted closer to the edges of the Voria system, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He wasn't one to believe in superstitions or fate, but this time, his instincts were screaming at him. He turned to Lieutenant Cade, who had just entered the room. We're almost there, Jackson said, his voice low. Cade nodded but didn't speak. He understood what was at stake. Everyone on the crew did. The Voria kingdom was relying on them, and they couldn't afford failure. But Cade also knew the deeper truth. This mission was no longer just about saving the princess. It was about the survival of a planet and its people. Lyra, meanwhile, was in her quarters, the weight of her father's expectations growing heavier every day. She had once dreamed of ruling a free kingdom, a place where she could fight beside her people, not be chained by political obligations and royal duties. But the rescue mission had changed everything. Jackson had shown her a side of herself she never knew existed. Someone who could fight, someone who could be free. But as much as Jackson had helped her see her own strength, she also knew the cost of their alliance. Her father would never let her go so easily. King Eldrick had always been a man of tradition, a ruler who believed in the old ways of arranged marriages and political unions. Lyra knew that once they returned to Voria, the king would demand more than just a debt of gratitude. He would demand her loyalty in ways that could tear them apart. Lyra had kept these thoughts to herself, but now, as they approached her home world, she couldn't remain silent anymore. She found Jackson in the ship's mess hall, his usual relaxed demeanor replaced with the tension of an impending battle. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice quieter than usual. Jackson looked up, his eyes locking with hers. He knew this conversation was inevitable. They had both been avoiding it, but now it was time to face the truth. "About what?" he asked, trying to mask the tension in his voice. She sat down opposite him, her eyes meeting his with determination. "About what happens next. When we reach Voria, my father will demand that we unite, legally, politically, personally. It's his way of solidifying his power. And I'm sure he'll expect me to comply." Jackson's face hardened, but his voice remained calm. "And you're not willing to do that?" Lyra's expression was a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. "I can't be forced into something like that. I can't be a pawn in a political game. I want to rule Voria with my own hands, to make decisions for my people, not for some marriage agreement." Jackson nodded slowly. "I understand. But you also know what that means, right? If you refuse your father's demands, you're risking everything. Your people, your kingdom, it could all fall apart." "I know," she said, her voice trembling for the first time. "But if I'm to be queen, I want it to be because of my choices. I don't want to be tied down to something I didn't want in the first place." Jackson stared at her, his mind racing. He understood her feelings. He had seen firsthand the burden that came with being forced into a role you didn't choose. He had spent his life fighting for freedom, for the chance to make his own path. But even he knew the stakes were higher now. If Lyra refused her father's demands, it could fracture the kingdom, and worse, it could make her an enemy of the very people she was trying to protect. "Then we'll have to find another way," Jackson said finally. "We can't let your father control your fate. But we also can't let the entire kingdom fall apart." Lyra's eyes softened. "But how? How do we fight a king and an empire?" "We don't fight them the way they expect," Jackson said, standing up and walking over to the strategy board. He began to sketch a plan, speaking as he went. "We'll unite the people who want change. We'll make alliances where no one expects them, use their weaknesses against them. But more importantly, we'll show the people of Voria that they can fight for their future without bloodshed." It was a bold plan, perhaps the boldest he had ever proposed. But Jackson could see the flicker of hope in Lyra's eyes. This wasn't about royal duty anymore. This was about their future, and the future of Voria. And for the first time, Jackson didn't feel alone in the mission. He had Lyra by his side, a warrior queen in the making. But even as they discussed their plans, Jackson knew that time was running out. They couldn't avoid the king forever. And when they landed, every decision they made would have consequences. As the Relentless entered Voria's atmosphere, Jackson's mind raced. The mission was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. He had no idea how they would confront the king's demands or how they would unite the people of Voria, but one thing was clear: the galaxy would never be the same after this. Whether they were ready or not, the future of an entire planet rested in their hands. A plan to escape, 800 words. The atmosphere aboard the Relentless grew heavy as Voria loomed closer. The ship, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a ticking time bomb, carrying with it not just the fate of Princess Lyra but the very future of her kingdom. The crew was ready, but Jackson and Lyra knew that the real battle lay not in the stars or the battlefield, it was in the throne room of Voria itself. The plan Jackson had begun to formulate was a dangerous one, but it was their only option. The kingdom was divided, and no one could trust the king's court. Jackson had learned that the princess's father was a ruler caught between tradition and fear, with the galaxy's looming threats pushing him to extremes. It was this very extremism that Lyra feared would ruin her world, and Jackson had promised her that together they would stop it. They had to make their move before King Eldrick could solidify his grip on the throne by forcing the princess into a political union. Jackson's plan was simple. He would reach out to the factions within the kingdom who were dissatisfied with the king's rule, forming alliances in the shadows, while Lyra would secretly contact her most trusted generals to organize a covert rebellion against her father's authoritarian rule. But nothing ever goes as planned. As the ship entered Voria's atmosphere, the first sign of trouble came in the form of an encrypted transmission. It was from Lyra's father, and the message was chilling. Return immediately, or face the consequences. Voria will not fall into chaos. You belong to me, Lyra. And if you refuse, the cost will be your life and the life of anyone who dares to oppose me. Jackson's jaw tightened as he listened to the transmission, his knuckles turning white on the console. This was not a warning, it was a threat. A warning that Lyra was already in too deep. If they didn't act quickly, they might lose their chance forever. I knew he would do this, Lyra said quietly, her face hardening. She wasn't surprised. In fact, she had expected her father to use her as a pawn in this twisted game of power. But now he's made it personal. Jackson turned to her, his face a mask of determination. Then it's time we make it personal, too. We'll show him that we won't be controlled. The crew gathered in the strategy room, each of them prepared for what was about to come. Jackson outlined the next phase of the mission, using the intelligence they had gathered from defectors within the kingdom's military. They knew where the king's most loyal soldiers were stationed, and where the rebellious factions had begun to form. We can't afford to waste any time, Jackson said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Lyra, we'll need your connections to the generals. We have to move before your father has a chance to gather his full forces. Lyra nodded, her usual calm demeanor giving way to the fierceness she had inherited from her ancestors. I know who I can trust. The generals loyal to me will act swiftly, but I'll need you to coordinate with my trusted commanders on the ground. Jackson's mind raced. There were so many moving parts to this operation, but there was no room for failure. They had to keep moving, stay one step ahead of the king. We need a diversion, Jackson continued. Something big, something to draw the king's forces away from the capital, even if it's just for a few hours. Maris, the ship's commander, spoke up. I can hack into their communication systems, send false signals, cause confusion. I'll scramble their patrols and throw them off course long enough for us to get to the heart of the rebellion. It'll give us a window, but not much, Cade, the sniper, added, already preparing his weapons. We'll need to move quickly once the distraction starts. Jackson turned to Lyra. Once we've got the diversion set, we'll make our way to the royal palace. You're the key, Lyra. You have to convince your people to rise up with us, and your generals need to strike fast. The palace will be the heart of your father's power, and we need to take it before he can rally the rest of his forces. Lyra's gaze darkened. She had spent her entire life under her father's rule, but now, the idea of facing him as an enemy, of taking him down to secure her own future, was a bitter pill to swallow. But she knew what had to be done. I've spent my life trying to live up to my father's expectations, she said softly, but not anymore. The kingdom needs a new way forward, one that isn't based on fear and tradition. I will not be the pawn he wants me to be. Jackson's eyes softened as he looked at her. She had come so far in such a short time, from the delicate princess he had rescued to the fierce leader she was becoming. He had never expected to find someone like her, someone who could stand alongside him, someone who could share this burden. You're not alone in this, Jackson said. We'll make sure of that. The plan was set into motion. Maris worked quickly to scramble the kingdom's communications, sending false alerts and confusing the enemy's patrols. Cade set up his sniper positions, ready to eliminate anyone who threatened their path. Jackson and Lyra gathered the support they needed from the generals, coordinating in secret, knowing that once the rebellion started, there would be no turning back. The tension in the air was palpable as they approached the heart of Voria. The Relentless was low on fuel, its engines strained from the long journey, but there was no turning back now. The time had come to take the palace, and with it, the kingdom's future. Lyra stood beside Jackson as the ship made its final descent into the capital city. "Are you ready for this?" she asked quietly. Jackson gave her a small smile, his eyes resolute. "We're ready." The final battle, 800 words. The city of Voria stretched out before them, its towering spires casting long shadows over the capital. The streets, once vibrant with the energy of its people, now felt cold, almost empty. The weight of what was about to unfold hung in the air like a storm cloud, ready to break. Jackson could feel it in his bones, the final confrontation was near. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes scanning the skyline, the tension visible in every line of her face. The quiet before the storm was overwhelming, but she had made her choice. There was no turning back now. The king's forces were closing in, but she would not let fear stop her. This battle would determine not only the future of her kingdom, but her own freedom. "I never thought it would come to this," Lyra murmured, her voice soft but strong. "My father, he used to be a man of honor. But I don't recognize him anymore." Jackson turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with understanding. "The man you knew is gone. But you can still be the change your people need. This is your chance, Lyra." Her gaze hardened as she nodded. "I'll take it. For them. For Voria." As the Relentless descended toward the heart of the capital, Jackson's mind raced through the details of their plan. They had set the stage, gathered their allies, and created the diversion. But the king's palace still stood as the final obstacle, a symbol of his power, and it was there that they would face him. Inside the palace, King Eldrick waited, his thoughts as cold and calculating as the stone walls surrounding him. He had expected this, Lyra's rebellion, Jackson's interference. But what he didn't expect was the level of defiance he was about to face. His daughter had become something more than just a pawn in his game. She was the enemy now, and he would stop at nothing to ensure her defeat. "Father," Lyra's voice rang out as they entered the palace throne room, flanked by her generals and Jackson's elite team. The room fell silent as the king turned his gaze upon his daughter, a mixture of pride and disdain in his eyes. "You've come to betray me, then," King Eldrick said, his voice cold, his eyes narrowed. "I knew you would choose rebellion over duty. But you're wrong, Lyra. The kingdom needs stability. You cannot offer that." "You're wrong, father," Lyra replied, stepping forward. "What this kingdom needs is freedom, not tyranny. The people have suffered under your rule for too long. They deserve a chance to live without fear, without being bound to the old ways." The king's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "You've become a fool. Do you truly believe that they will follow you? You're a child who doesn't understand the cost of leadership. The galaxy isn't kind to those who challenge it." Jackson stepped forward, his voice firm. "It's not about what the galaxy thinks anymore. It's about what your people want. It's about what Lyra wants. And I'm standing beside her." The tension in the room was palpable. King Eldrick's eyes flickered with a dangerous fury, but his voice remained steady. "You've made your choices, all of you. But mark my words, there will be consequences." Without warning, the king's guards surged forward, weapons drawn. It was a final attempt to maintain control, to crush any hope of rebellion before it could fully take root. The battle that ensued was a blur of movement and sound. Jackson's team sprang into action, each of them trained to fight with precision and speed. Cade's sniper rifle rang out, picking off the guards who posed the greatest threat. Maris hacked into the palace's security systems, sending the lights into chaos and disorienting the enemy soldiers. Lyra, fueled by years of frustration and anger, fought like a true warrior, her blade flashing as she cut down any who dared challenge her. But it was in the heart of the throne room that the true battle unfolded. The king moved with purpose, his regal robes swirling around him as he drew his own blade, a dark, curved weapon forged in the heart of the Svarnak Empire. His movements were precise, calculated, and cold as ice. "You think you can defeat me?" he spat, his voice thick with venom. "I have ruled this kingdom for decades. You are nothing." Lyra's eyes blazed with defiance. "You may have ruled with fear, father, but I will rule with justice. This ends today." The sound of clashing swords filled the throne room as father and daughter faced each other. King Eldric's strength was unmatched, but Lyra's resolve was even stronger. She had spent her life under his shadow, but now she was breaking free, fighting for her people, for her future. As they fought, Jackson stood beside her, his eyes scanning the room for any more threats. But he knew that the true battle was happening right in front of him. Lyra was not just fighting her father, she was fighting for the kingdom itself, for everything she had ever wanted. And she was winning. Finally, with a swift, powerful strike, Lyra disarmed her father, sending his blade clattering to the floor. She stood over him, her chest heaving with exertion, but her face was resolute. "This is the end of your reign, father," Lyra said, her voice steady. "Voria will be free." The king knelt before her, his pride shattered, his eyes filled with a mix of rage and helplessness. For the first time, Lyra saw him for what he truly was, weak, desperate, and unable to see the future he had so long clung to. Jackson stepped forward, his hand resting gently on Lyra's shoulder. "You did it," he said quietly. "You freed your people." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something more. "We did it," she corrected, her voice strong. "We did it together." As the dust settled, and the last of the king's loyalists were subdued, the people of Voria began to rise up. The rebellion had succeeded, and the kingdom was finally free. Lyra stood with Jackson at her side, ready to lead her people into a new era, an era of freedom, justice, and unity. The final battle was over, but their journey was just beginning. Together, they had changed the course of history, and now it was time to rebuild, to create a future where no one had to fight alone.